Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode about the KWA Tavor GBBR Airsoft rifle. Today we will be going over how to modify the original nozzle return spring to make it work with the NPAS. I will supply the NPAS kit with a new spring that has the right dimensions and right length, but it is possible to modify the original nozzle return spring to work with the NPAS as well. For the example, I will be using a LM4 nozzle return spring that has different dimensions, but for the example that will work perfectly. These springs will always come or will always be attached to the nozzle plug, and for this modification it is not necessary to remove the spring from the plug, but since I already did quite some modifications to the available part that I have here, they are of course disassembled from the nozzle plugs, but it's not necessary to do that for the modification. Alright, so we will be placing these nozzle plugs a little bit aside. Now these are examples of cut off pieces that I kept from the original KWA Tavor nozzle return spring, and I will be using that a little bit later as an example. Yeah, so you can either decide on, okay, I want to install the new spring because that is easier for me to do with respect to modifying the original nozzle return spring, as I will show shortly. But for the rest of the video we will not be needing this one, except for I will take some measurements just to show you the similarities and the differences. So the original nozzle return spring, it has an outer diameter of 3.6 millimeters and a wire thickness of 0.4 millimeters. Yeah. And the new return spring that I have supplied with the NPAS kit will have an outer diameter of also 3.6 millimeters, at least that is what the datasheet tells me, but it is off by about 1/10 of a millimeter. That is well within tolerance. And it has a wire diameter of also 0.4 millimeters. Now in terms of length, the modification that we need to make, we need to shorten the length down to anywhere between 28 and 29 millimeters. That would be ideal. Now the new spring that I have supplied with the NPAS kit has a length of about 26.6 millimeters. That was the most convenient size available. There was one size that was just a little bit longer, but that was just a little bit too long, and that wouldn't result in some pre-tension of the nozzle against the rear of the bolt. So you do want to have some pre-tension in that spring to keep the nozzle retained against the back of the bolt. If there is no pre-tension, then the nozzle will be a little bit loose, and I don't think that you want that. So that's why it's better to have just a slightly shorter spring that has more than enough spring travel in itself, so there's no worries about that. But it might be the case that this feels a little bit stiffer than this one because this one is shorter. It's no problem, I've tested it, it works fine. But if you don't want to replace this for whatever reason, you can modify this one to work as well, as I will demonstrate shortly. Yeah, the size that I have reduced this to is about 29 millimeters. But anywhere between 28 and 29 would be perfect. All right. Now the LM4 nozzle return spring, that is has just a little bit different dimensions. So 3.5 millimeters of outer diameter, and the wire thickness is smaller, so 0.36 millimeters. This also means that this spring is significantly less stiff. So if you, for whatever reason, have one of these laying around, or you decide to use this in the KWA Tavor, then you can experience a little bit of different behavior. I would recommend against using this spring because, I've simply only tested with these two. This seems to work perfectly, and if the spring is much weaker, it can be the case that the nozzle doesn't retract fast enough. That's why I will just be using this for the example. Now, in order to make this modification on this one, it can remain attached to the nozzle plug. That's not a problem. You don't have to take it off. But what you want to do is you want to cut away about 5 coils. So if you hold the spring like this and you count 7 to 8 coils, I would recommend counting 8 coils. That is where you want to make your cut. For the example, I need to cut away more coils because I will be reducing this to match this length. but because this spring for the LM4 has different dimensions, it has more coils, I have to cut away more coils, but just know that you need to cut away about 7 to 8 coils in order to reduce the length to about 28 to 29 millimeters. So let's just make that cut. So you need some side cutters for that, and you just count off 7 coils, then put your nail in between there, just count with a hook tool like that. Maybe you need to use like a magnifying glass to make that a little bit easier on yourself, or you can slightly pre-stretch the spring and then count it. Do it like however it works for you, but after that you might want to just put your nail in the position where you want to cut, and then somehow get your side cutter in that same position. Now that might be a little bit annoying to do. You might want to stretch it a little bit and then make your cut. Now it is possible that you permanently deform the spring a little bit, but that's not a problem because you will be folding over 2 additional coils in order to make new eyelets for the spring. So let me just eyeball this in the same kind of length. Think about right here. Yeah, right here, all right. Some cutters with a different beak would also be nice, and then you just cut it off. Now, we of course need to make some new eyelets for the spring, and we are going to orient that in the same plane because that will be most convenient for installing it and getting it all attached again in the nozzle rear piece. So we're going to take 2 additional coils. We're just going to fold that over. Now, let's get that started a little bit. I need to grab one. Maybe one more coil. Let's see how we do here. Yeah, look at that. And then we can use something like our needle nose pliers to grab that and pull it down, or maybe just use your fingers. Not exactly sure how I did it the last time, but it is a little bit annoying to do because these wires are all really small. It's difficult to get a good grip and bend it without deforming the spring too much or in places where you don't want it. So yeah, now I'm starting to get it. Bend it a little bit more, but your fingers will work just fine. And then like that. Now I will cut away a tiny bit more of this spring, because this piece of coil is not ending up quite how I want it. That's why I want to cut it away, just like that. Now bend it a little bit further, and then we have created 2 additional loops to create a new eyelet for the spring, and that will work just fine. Now I didn't do this one as neatly as I did this one. It just takes a little patience. Let me see if I can deform this in. Oh, a little bit, yes. Yes, that's nice. Yeah, it's also possible to deform the spring in just a little bit so that it doesn't stick out beyond the outer diameter of the spring. And just like that, you have modified your spring to work with the NPAS kit as well. Now let's verify the length. It's just over, so this is still a little bit too long. Got these two coils off. And let's try again. Yeah. Now it's also possible to fold the eyes, or the new eyelet in this direction, so that these two ends are opposite. That doesn't really matter. But for the sake of consistency, let's just keep this in the same plane. All right, come on, let me grab under there. Oh, no, that was a piece of spring wire in my finger. And this is also the reason why I have included the new spring, because this is just a little bit annoying to do. Because you don't want to overstretch a part of the spring that you don't want to. And then maybe use your pliers to bend it out a little bit. Make sure you hold the remaining coils tight. Oh. Almost there. Yeah, like that will work. So I've managed to keep it kind of in the center, but not as aligned really nicely. So it's not a big problem, but would have been nicer if it was in one plane. So just keep in mind, take your time to do this. Measure twice, cut once, because you don't want to cut it too short. If you cut it a little bit too long, or it ends up too long, like I just experienced, that's not a problem. Right now it's just over 28, and that's perfect. So that's kind of how you modify the spring. You might want to have some longer nails as I have, or yeah, that can kind of help. As I said, this will probably be still attached. Then you can just install it back in. You do need to do the O-ring modification here on the plug, but that will make it maybe a little bit quicker. You don't have to fool around with that small pin that you have to take out and then replace it with the spring that I provided. But if you don't want to mess with the spring like I did, just install the newly provided spring. And that's it. That's how you do this modification. And yeah, that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.